There was New Year's Eve in New York City, and the city pulsed with vibrant energy, as if every corner was brimming with promises and hopes. The biting December cold enveloped everything, but the warmth of anticipation heated the hearts. Yet, there was something else, an indescribable sensation, as if the night itself was about to unveil a dark secret. My name is Jonathan Mercer, and that night, while people hurried to their parties, I found myself in a small bar on the corner of 42nd Avenue. The lively music and laughter echoed through the room, but I couldn't shake an unsettling feeling. What should have been a moment of joy felt like a weight pressing on my chest. Little did I know, the night was about to lead me into a mystery that would change my life forever. As I gazed at the bright lights of Times Square, I thought about how the promises of a new year always bring out our deepest hopes, but also our darkest fears. The truth was, I had recently lost someone very dear to me, and that loss surrounded me like a shadow. What I didn't know was that the resolution to my pain was about to intertwine with an inexplicable event. As midnight approached, people began counting down the seconds, their voices blending into a symphony of excitement. I was lost in my thoughts when I heard a piercing scream. The sound cut through the air like a knife, snapping my attention to the street outside the bar. Curious, I followed the crowd gathering on the sidewalk. What I saw left me frozen. In the middle of the crowd, a man stood, his gaze fixed on something. His expression was one of sheer terror. My instincts drove me to move closer. The man, whose name was Henry, was pointing toward a dark corner of the street where the festive lights didn't reach. Curiosity consumed me as I stepped closer, adrenaline coursing through my body. Something happened, he shouted, his voice trembling. I saw a woman. A woman? Where? I asked, trying to make sense of the situation. There in the alley. She was crying, he replied, his eyes wide with fear. A chill ran down my spine. I decided I needed to investigate. What could have caused a woman to cry alone on a night of celebration? I followed Henry into the alley, where the moonlight barely illuminated the path. As soon as I entered, an icy coldness enveloped the air, and the atmosphere felt heavy, charged with something supernatural. At the far end of the alley, I saw her. A woman in a white dress, with long, disheveled hair, was kneeling. Her face was buried in her hands, and the sound of her sobbing echoed in the stillness of the night. Moving closer, I tried to understand what was happening. Are you okay? I asked, my concern evident in my voice. She lifted her head, and her sorrowful eyes met mine. He's gone, and I can't find him, she whispered, as though the weight of her words could shatter the night itself. Who's gone? I asked, intrigued. A growing sense that something far deeper was unfolding began to settle over me. My brother. He disappeared on New Year's Eve, 5 years ago, she replied, and I realized her tears weren't just from sadness, but from a despair that transcended time. I come here every year, but I've never been able to find him. Her story touched me in a way I hadn't expected. It felt as though the universe had aligned our lives that night, and I was about to become involved in a mystery I couldn't ignore. I can help you find him, I offered without a second thought. The desire to bring a glimmer of hope to this lost soul outweighed my own grief. She looked at me, and for the first time, a faint light sparked in her eyes. Together, we began investigating the surroundings. The city, which once seemed like merely a backdrop for celebration, now transformed into a labyrinth of secrets. We spoke with neighborhood residents who recounted stories of strange disappearances on New Year's Eve. With each account, the tension grew, and the image of her missing brother became more vivid. As the night wore on, the woman, who introduced herself as Clara, and I followed clues that led us to unexpected places, from old warehouses to forgotten squares. It felt as if the entire city was conspiring around her brother. The magic of New Year's Eve had turned into a tale of mystery and pain. Finally, we arrived at a secluded park, where the atmosphere shifted. A cold wind blew, and the distant sounds of the city's celebrations seemed to fade away. Clara stopped in front of an ancient tree, her eyes gleaming with renewed determination. He always loved this place, she said. her voice now steady. "If he's anywhere, it's here." As we spoke, a presence began to manifest. A stronger breeze swept through, and Clara closed her eyes, as if attuned to something beyond this world. I watched her, sensing we were on the verge of something extraordinary. And then, in an instant, everything changed. A shadow emerged among the trees, and a figure began to materialize. It was a man, his features familiar, and as he looked at Clara, a smile of recognition formed on his lips. "Clara," he called out, and the connection between them was palpable. I was witnessing a reunion that defied logic and time. The horror of loss had transformed into a moment of pure joy, and the city, with all its bustle, seemed to quiet in reverence for this revelation. In that moment, I realized that New Year's Eve wasn't just a celebration of new beginnings, but also an opportunity to heal old wounds. My own grief and pain began to fade, and I understood that sometimes what we seek isn't just what's lost, but also the connections that bind us. As the clock struck midnight, it wasn't just the start of a new year, but also a renewal of hope and bonds. And there, amidst shadows and lights, I discovered that the mysteries of New Year's Eve could indeed be unraveled, even the deepest and darkest ones. Clara and I stood frozen, our eyes fixed on the figure emerging from the trees. He moved toward us slowly, as though each step was an act of courage. The man who had once been lost was now becoming real, and the air around us seemed to hum with the energy of their reunion. But I quickly sensed that the joy dominating this moment was only a fraction of what lay ahead. "Clara, I've been waiting for you," he said, his voice echoing like a whisper. But something in his expression unsettled me. There was a shadow in his eyes, a sadness that contradicted the joy of their reunion. I didn't know what to think. How could a man disappear for 5 years and return without any explanation? The nature around us seemed to conspire, and a cold breeze swept through the park, carrying the scent of damp earth and dry leaves. Clara's joy began to mingle with a sense of unease. "What happened to you?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. I don't know how to explain," he replied, his voice faltering. "I was in a different place, a place I can't describe. But now I'm back, and I can't stay." His words seemed to linger in the air, and I felt that something was terribly wrong. What did he mean by, "I can't stay"? The festive atmosphere of the city, which had felt so distant moments ago, now seemed like an almost unreal memory. Before I could recover from the shock, a sudden shift in the atmosphere made my heart race. The wind picked up, and the leaves on the trees began to whisper, as if sharing a dark secret. Clara looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. "Jonathan, what's happening?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I replied, trying to stay calm. But the truth was, I was just as confused as she was. Rational explanations were slipping away, and I realized that something supernatural was at play. It was as if the night itself was alive, and every shadow carried a story that refused to be told. Clara's brother seemed to hesitate, as though he was battling an invisible force. "I have to go," he said, and his words hit like a blow. "They're coming." "Who's coming?" I asked, adrenaline beginning to surge through my veins. "The ones who kept me there," he replied, his expression darkening. "They don't want me to stay here." The tension in the air was palpable, and I didn't know how to react. What he was saying was absurd, but the sincerity in his eyes made me pause. Clara was in a state of shock, and I knew I had to protect this woman who had become so important to me in such a short time. "You can't leave, not now," I said, trying to reason with him. "We need to understand what's happening." But before we could argue further, a presence made itself known. A shadow stretched between the trees, and I saw it clearly. It was an indistinct figure, a silhouette that seemed to absorb the light around it. An intense cold enveloped the area, and Clara screamed, clutching her brother's arm tightly. "Stay together," I shouted, pulling them back. But it was too late. The shadow moved closer, and a wave of despair washed over me. I knew this was no longer just about finding her missing brother. We were now facing something that defied logic and reason. "Jonathan, what is that?" Clara asked, her voice barely a whisper. The fear in her eyes was almost unbearable. I don't know, I replied, though deep down I felt we were entangled in something far greater than we had anticipated. The city, with all its lights and festivities, now felt like a trap, and the mystery of Clara's brother's disappearance was unraveling in ways I could never have imagined. The shadowy figure began to materialize, revealing itself as a woman in a white dress, just like Clara. The same dress, the same lost expression. My heart raced as I realized we were facing a duplicity that transcended time and space. You shouldn't be here, the woman whispered, her voice echoing like a lament. You weren't meant to come. Who are you? I asked. My courage mingled with disbelief. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and reality seemed to blur around us. I am the guardian of lost souls, she replied, her words reverberating like a warning. And you are in danger. Danger, Clara repeated, looking at me with confusion etched on her face. What is she talking about? You don't understand, the woman continued, her voice rising in intensity. New Year's Eve is a portal, a time when the barriers between worlds grow thin. Those who have disappeared cannot simply return. They belong to another place. Her words struck me like a blow. The idea that Clara's brother, and possibly many others, no longer belonged to this world was terrifying. I glanced at the man beside me. He seemed to be fighting an invisible force, his expression torn between the desire to stay and the need to leave. Clara, we need to get out of here, I shouted, pulling her back. But she was frozen, her eyes locked on the figure approaching us. He's my brother, Clara cried, her voice filled with anguish. He can't leave again. The woman in the white dress moved closer, and the air around us seemed to hum with an escalating energy. I knew we had to act quickly, but what could we possibly do in the face of something so inexplicable? Time was running out, and the new year, which should have symbolized hope, was quickly turning into a nightmare. Clara, we need to find a way to free him, I said, determination beginning to take hold of me. If the night is a portal, maybe there's a way to reverse it. But how? What could be done to challenge forces beyond our understanding? Fear gripped me, but the need to act overpowered the uncertainty. With the shadow closing in and the city's clock striking the start of a new year, I realized our journey was only beginning, and the challenges ahead would be more intense than anything we could have imagined. The air was thick, and every breath felt like an effort. The figure of the woman in the white dress loomed before us, like a specter from a nightmare. Her gaze, deep and enigmatic, seemed to pierce through my soul, exposing every insecurity, every fear I had tried to bury. Clara stood beside me, trembling, while her brother appeared trapped between two worlds, fighting against an invisible force pulling him away from us. Why are you doing this? I shouted, my voice strained under the weight of the moment. He's hers. He belongs here. The woman didn't respond immediately. Instead, her eyes glimmered with an eerie light, as though a storm of emotions was brewing inside her. You don't understand what's at stake, she finally said. Those who have crossed over cannot simply return. Every New Year's Eve, the barriers between worlds grow thin, and the hope of reunion can turn into a nightmare. Despair swelled within me, and a suffocating sense of helplessness enveloped me like a thick fog. I had to find a way to help Clara and her brother, but reality itself seemed to be unraveling before my eyes. The trees around us appeared to lean in, as if listening to our conversation, and the wind howled, carrying with it the whispers of lost souls. If you're the guardian of lost souls, then there must be a way to free him, Clara exclaimed, the determination in her voice defying her fear. We can't let him go again. The woman shook her head, a sad smile forming on her lips. To free him will require a sacrifice. A heart must be willing to let go of what it loves most. Only then can the chains binding him be broken. Her words echoed in my mind, and a wave of panic washed over me. Sacrifice? What did that mean? I looked at Clara, and the anguish in her eyes was unmistakable. What would she be willing to lose? And me? What was I prepared to risk? I can't lose you again, Jonathan, Clara whispered, her eyes welling with tears. He's my brother. I can't let him go. The pressure intensified, and the shadow of the woman seemed to grow darker, absorbing the light around us. Time was running out, and the choice we would have to make loomed closer, like a runaway train barreling toward us. We need an alternative, I said, my voice trembling. We can't sacrifice anything without understanding the consequences. But what could be done? As the woman in white stood before us, her presence became increasingly oppressive. The environment began to shift. The trees twisted as if pulled by an invisible force. Shadows danced around us, and I realized this wasn't just a reunion. It was a convergence of forces that defied logic. A new understanding started to dawn on me. Clara's brother wasn't the only one who was lost. Somehow, I felt the entity was connected to my past. Forgotten memories began to surface, and I recalled a friend who had disappeared years ago. A friend who had been involved in something I had never fully understood. The guilt hit me like a punch to the stomach. Wait, I shouted, the revelation hitting me. This isn't just about him. It's deeper. There's something more connecting all of this. The woman in white looked at me with a mix of curiosity and sorrow. You're finally beginning to understand. Every lost soul has its chains, and every chain has a link. If you don't unravel the mysteries of your past, you won't be able to save anyone. The tension mounted, and reality began to warp around me. Time seemed to fracture, and I found myself facing forgotten memories. Faces that had faded from my mind. The city around us, with its bright lights and festivities, transformed into a stage of shadows and echoes of what once was. I was surrounded by visions of disappearances and inexplicable events that had marked my childhood. But why was it all coming back now? What was the woman trying to make me see? Fear morphed into determination. I needed to confront these ghosts. With each fragment that surfaced, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders, yet also the burden of a new responsibility. The truth might be more terrifying than I was ready to face. Clara, I need you to help me understand, I said, urgency in my voice. If there's a connection between what happened to your brother and what happened in my past, maybe we can find a way to free him. She nodded, her eyes shining with newfound determination. We'll figure this out together, Jonathan. We can't let him stay trapped. The woman in white observed us, and a look of approval crossed her face. In an instant, the atmosphere shifted again. The shadows began to stir, and the trees seemed to listen to our words. I knew we were about to uncover something that would challenge our understanding of life and death, and that the true conflict wasn't just between us and the entity but also within ourselves. Prepare yourselves, the woman said, her voice now reverberating like a distant echo. What you're about to uncover may change everything. Are you ready to face the truth? As her question echoed in my mind, I knew there was no turning back. The new year was approaching, and with it, the promise of a resolution that could either bring freedom or condemnation. And I was determined to find out which it would be. The atmosphere around us pulsed with a strange energy, as if the very earth was breathing anxiously. The woman in white fixed her gaze on me, but it wasn't just her presence that unsettled me. It was the sudden realization that something else was lurking, something that transcended the boundaries of what we understood as reality. Prepare yourselves, she repeated, her voice ringing like a warning. The truth you seek may not be the one you expect. At that moment, a wave of despair swept over me. The air grew denser, almost as if the weight of her words was taking form. I looked at Clara, and the fear in her eyes mirrored my own. Whatever we were about to discover could be devastating. Suddenly, a piercing scream shattered the air, and a chilling cold enveloped us. Clara's brother began to writhe, his form twisting as the woman moved closer to him. I reached out, but before I could grasp him, a blinding light erupted from the trees, engulfing everything around us. It was as if the shadows were converging to create something larger and more terrifying. Jonathan, Clara screamed, her desperation echoing through the treetops. What's happening? I had no answer, but a deep instinct told me we were approaching something far darker than we'd anticipated. The light grew stronger, and the shapes around us became indistinct, as if space itself were twisting. I looked toward the woman in white, but she now seemed distant, a mere shadow amidst the chaos. Then, everything shifted. The light dissipated, and instead of a safe space, we found ourselves in a place that felt like a distorted reflection of our reality. The trees were twisted, and a thick fog blanketed the ground. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and something else, a smell that hinted at death and despair. Fear coursed through me as I realized we weren't just at a point of convergence between worlds. We were in a limbo, a space where lost souls wandered aimlessly, trapped between life and death. And there, amidst the whispers of countless voices, something began to take shape. A nebulous, flickering figure emerged from the mist, and my heart pounded in my chest. "You shouldn't be here," the figure whispered, its voice low and trembling, as though burdened with the weight of 1,000 sorrows. "You don't understand the risks." "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely steady. Fear gripped me, but my need for answers outweighed the terror. "I am an echo of what was," the figure replied, its form shifting like smoke in the wind. "A guardian of forgotten memories. Clara's brother is trapped, but not in the way you think. He is not merely a victim." My stomach churned. What did that mean? I glanced at Clara, who was as pale as the moon. "What do you mean by that?" I demanded. "The connection you feel," the figure continued, "is not just with the past. It goes deeper. He is not the only lost soul here. You, too, carry invisible chains that bind you to this place." Her words cut through me like a blade. I had lost a friend years ago, and the guilt I carried surged within me. But how did this connect to Clara's brother? "What are you saying?" I demanded, urgency rising. "He has become a guardian as well," the figure revealed, and a wave of horror washed over me. "When he disappeared, it wasn't just an accident. He was trying to protect you, and now he's trapped between worlds, keeping the doors open for those who should not return." Clara let out a cry, and I realized the truth I had feared was unfolding before us. Her brother wasn't just a victim. He was a link, an unwilling guardian of a far greater secret. I recalled the stories we had heard of disappearances and unresolved mysteries in the city, and everything began to make sense. Whatever he had been trying to protect now threatened not just his life, but all of ours. "You must make a choice," the figure whispered, its voice fading into a distant echo. "If you don't confront the chains binding you to this place, he won't be the only one to suffer the consequences." It felt as though the ground had vanished beneath my feet. The revelation struck me like a tidal wave. It wasn't just Clara's brother who was at risk. I was in danger, too. What I had neglected in my past could return to haunt me. The fates of all of us were intertwined in a way I never could have foreseen. The tension in the air was suffocating, and the woman in white seemed to approach us again, her expression now grave. I knew the choice I had to make was drawing near, and that the truth I sought might very well be the key to our freedom or our doom. Time was running out, and I needed to act before the darkness consumed us completely. I stood frozen, the nebulous figure's words echoing in my mind like a grim mantra. "He has become a guardian as well." The revelation struck me with overwhelming force, and the responsibility I felt for my own past began to intertwine with the fate of Clara and her brother. What could I do? How could I save Jonathan if I didn't even know how to free myself? The figure was fading slowly, as though each word it spoke drained a part of its essence. "You must confront the chains that bind you," it repeated, but its voice echoed as if drifting further away, along with any hope of finding a solution. "Clara," I shouted, turning to her. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, and confusion was giving way to terror. "We have to do something. We can't leave him here." But even as I spoke, part of me questioned whether we were capable of altering Jonathan's fate. What if the truth hurts him even more? Clara responded, her voice trembling. What if he's safer here than in the real world? Doubt consumed her, and I could see her grappling with the stories we had heard about lost souls. Spirits clinging to a place, a moment, like shackles that kept them captive. "We need to find out what really happened," I insisted, determination beginning to creep into my words. If he's trapped as a guardian, maybe we can find a way to free him. But we need to understand what that means. The world around us seemed to pulse, the fog swallowing everything in a shroud of mystery and dread. The twisted trees and encroaching darkness were silent witnesses to our despair. A new obstacle loomed before us. The need to unravel this mystery before we, too, were consumed by the darkness itself. As we walked, an eerie sensation of being watched began to envelop me. The whispers grew louder, as if the lost souls were manifesting, trying to communicate. "It's them," I murmured, feeling their presence drawing closer. "We need to listen." Clara hesitated but agreed to keep an open mind. "What do you mean?" "Maybe they know the truth about Jonathan. If he became a guardian, there might be a reason, a lesson we need to learn from this." Focusing, I closed my eyes and let the echoes of the voices seep into my mind. Images began to form, flashes of distorted memories, and one scene stood out among the others. Jonathan, standing at a crossroads, faced with a choice. He was looking at me, his face etched with pain but also with determination. "You're not alone." I heard his voice, but it felt distant, as if coming from far away. "You need to find the courage within yourself. Don't let fear define your choices." What did it mean? What was Jonathan trying to tell me? The connection I felt to him deepened, and I realized I needed to confront not only what had happened to him, but also my own fears. The fear of not being enough, of failing to save him. "Clara," I said, opening my eyes and turning to her. "I think I know what we need to do. We need to uncover how he became a guardian, and to do that, we have to face what he faced." She hesitated, but the determination in her gaze began to ignite. "What are you suggesting?" "We need to go back to the crossroads. If we can find the place where he made his choice, maybe we can understand what he was trying to protect. That might give us the key to set him free." But as we started moving toward the crossroads, the environment around us began to twist even more intensely. The thick fog turned into a labyrinth, and every step we took seemed to lead us further from our goal. Fear began to creep back into my mind, and I started questioning whether we were truly ready to face the truth. "What if we can't?" Clara asked, her voice heavy with uncertainty. "What if we find out he doesn't want to be saved, that he feels safer here?" The thought hit me like a punch to the gut. What if Jonathan had chosen this life? What would that mean for us? Guilt began to intertwine with my determination, and I found myself wrestling with the temptation to give up. But the nebulous figure's words still echoed in my mind. "If you don't confront the chains that bind him, he won't be the only one to suffer the consequences." That reminded me that whatever Jonathan had done, it wasn't in vain. He had chosen to protect something greater, and I needed to find out what that was. With every step, the doubt grew stronger, but I had no choice but to press on. The only way to rescue Jonathan was to face the darkness that had imprisoned him, and, in doing so, confront my own demons as well. The truth was waiting for us, and I was determined to find it, no matter what it would reveal. With every step we took toward the crossroads, the fog seemed to thicken, as if trying to swallow us whole. The voices, once murmurs, had now become screams. The sound of wails echoed around us, as though the lost souls were rebelling against our presence. My heart raced, and adrenaline coursed through me. What was I about to face? What had Jonathan truly chosen? "We need to keep going," I told Clara, trying to sound more confident than I actually felt. But inside, doubt was growing heavier. What if Jonathan didn't want to be saved? What if, by confronting his choice, we only ended up hurting him more? "If he's really here, then we have to respect his decision," Clara replied hesitantly. "But that means we're risking everything. What if what we find is worse than we imagined?" Her words echoed in my mind. The truth could be devastating, but which was worse? Uncovering the truth or remaining in ignorance? Fear and guilt intertwined like serpents, each trying to convince me to turn back. Then, the darkness around us began to stir. The fog shifted, molding itself into distorted figures, whispers transforming into screams of despair. I could feel the weight of intense gazes upon us, the palpable sensation of being watched. The souls that once seemed lost were now becoming hostile, as if they blamed us for their misery. "Turn back. You don't belong here." A voice, clearer than the others, rose above the wails. It was feminine, filled with anger and pain. Terror began to creep into my chest. What were we doing? Were we about to open a Pandora's box that was better left sealed? "Clara, let's stop," I said, my voice faltering. "I don't know if this is a good idea." But before I could finish, a wave of energy hit us, like lightning slicing through the fog. Clara collapsed beside me, and I, frozen in place, felt a powerful presence approaching. It was as if the very environment were rebelling against us. "You cannot turn back." The voice resounded again, stronger and more menacing. "You must face what you fear. Only then can you save the soul you seek." My body trembled. The nebulous figure that had warned me before was now back, more defined, more threatening. Fear twisted into a mix of anger and despair. I couldn't let this overwhelm me. Jonathan was out there, and I was the only one who could help him. "I'm not afraid of you," I shouted, trying to summon a spark of courage. But deep down, I knew it wasn't true. I was terrified of failing, of discovering that all my efforts had been in vain. The figure smiled, a sad yet sinister smile. "What you fear is not the darkness, but the truth it hides." Her words echoed in my mind, and I realized that to face this battle, I would have to confront not only the demons haunting Jonathan, but also my own. The chains binding me were made of guilt and regret. What I had done or failed to do might have contributed to Jonathan's pain. "Clara," I said, keeping my eyes locked on the figure, "we have to keep going. We need to find out what happened at the crossroads. This is bigger than any fear we might feel." She nodded, her expression resolute, though I caught a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "If we go, there's no turning back." "I know," I replied, "but we can't let fear paralyze us. Jonathan needs us." And so, we pressed on toward the crossroads, the dark presence trailing us like an unwanted shadow. The mist continued to swirl, and every step we took was accompanied by angry murmurs. The tension was almost unbearable, and the feeling that something terrible was about to happen clung to me like a second skin. At last, we reached the crossroads. The place was marked by a faint light struggling to pierce the darkness. In the center, an ancient symbol was etched into the ground, and I knew this was where Jonathan had made his decision. But what did it mean? "Jonathan," I shouted, hoping he could hear me. "We're here. We need to understand what you chose." Silence. My words echoed into the mist, swallowed by the oppressive void, and the sense of despair grew. What else could I do? What more could I say? Then, the voices began to rise again, but this time they weren't just wails. They were screams of pain, of betrayal. I realized these souls were trying to communicate. The truth was surfacing, but I wasn't sure if I was ready for it. "You need to understand," the nebulous figure whispered, now closer than ever. "Jonathan's choice wasn't his alone. It involved you and everyone around him. The darkness he embraced is an extension of your own guilt." My heart raced as reality began to unravel before me. The truth I sought was closer than I had imagined, but it was also more painful. I wasn't just here to confront Jonathan. I was here to face the part of myself that had let him slip away. The chains that bound him were, in part, forged by me, and now the choice stood before me. Face this truth or let the darkness continue to consume him and me. The air was heavy with tension as we finally stood at the crossroads. The symbol on the ground seemed to pulse with its own energy, as if alive, and the fog thickened around us, forming a barrier between us and the truth we sought. The ensuing silence was deafening, and I could feel the weight of anticipation, as though the world itself was holding its breath. "Jonathan," I called again, my voice echoing through the shadows. "If you're here, show yourself." The response came as a cold gust of wind, cutting through the mist and sending a shiver down my spine. The distorted figures began to form once more, and among them, a familiar silhouette emerged. My heart raced, and the ache of longing mixed with the anxiety coursing through me. It was Jonathan, but not the Jonathan I knew. His eyes were hollow, reflecting a profound sadness and despair that tore me apart. "Why did you come?" he asked, his voice a drawn-out whisper, as if every word cost him immense effort. "You shouldn't be here. I can't leave you like this," I replied, anger and pain fusing into a single driving force. "We can find a way out. You don't have to stay trapped in this darkness." He laughed, a bitter sound that echoed through the fog. "You think you can save me?" The choice was mine, and I embraced it. There is no going back. The nebulous figure beside me stepped forward, its piercing gaze fixed on Jonathan. "The darkness you chose is fed by your guilt. What you fear isn't your pain, but what you did to cause it." Her words cut like a blade, and I realized I wasn't just fighting the dark presence. I was battling the truth I had ignored for so long. The choices I had made, the opportunities one had let slip away, all of it had contributed to Jonathan losing himself. He had become a shadow of who he once was, and I had been a passive bystander. "Jonathan, listen," I pleaded, trying to move closer to him. The fog around us began to churn, and I could feel the presence of the lost souls gathering, drawn to our pain. "I know you're hurting, but you don't have to do this alone. I'm not here to judge you. I'm here to help." He hesitated, his expression shifting for a brief moment, as if a spark of hope had ignited, but it was quickly extinguished by the weight of the darkness. "You don't understand. I'm a burden. Everyone who gets close to me ends up getting hurt." His words echoed in my mind, and I realized he was right. The guilt I carried was a burden not just for me, but for Jonathan too. And in that moment, I understood it was time to confront not only his pain but my own as well. "You're not a burden. We're friends, Jonathan," I shouted, desperation spilling over in my voice. "And no matter what happened, I won't give up on you. Not like this." The nebulous figure moved, and the fog began to swirl around us, as if the very darkness was reacting to our struggle. "You must face the truth, or Jonathan will remain trapped forever. What you fear isn't the pain, it's the possibility of losing the connection you share." A cry of anguish echoed through the mist, and I felt Jonathan slipping away from me again, as though he was being pulled further into the void. "Please," I begged, my voice breaking. "I can't live knowing I didn't do enough, that I didn't fight for you." Jonathan looked at me, and for a moment, the emptiness in his eyes seemed to brighten. But then the darkness closed in again. "You don't understand. There's no hope for me." Anger and sadness swirled inside me like a storm. "You have no idea what hope is. Hope is what keeps us alive, Jonathan. Let me in. Let me help you see that you are more than your choices." The mist began to churn violently, and the voices of the lost souls rose into a deafening clamor. The nebulous figure stepped closer, its gaze fixed on me. "Face what you fear. Only then can he find the light again." I knew it was time to act. The truth was right in front of us, and I couldn't hesitate any longer. I took a deep breath, gathering every ounce of courage I had. "Jonathan, look at me. You're not alone in this fight. We'll face this together." A fog swirled, and a wave of energy rippled through the air. The cries of pain grew louder, nearly unbearable, and I felt the darkness threatening to consume us. But I couldn't give up. "Not now. I'm the reason you feel this way," I confessed, the truth finally escaping my lips. "I didn't do enough. I didn't fight for you when you needed me the most. But that doesn't mean you don't deserve to be saved. It's time for us to leave the guilt behind. Let's do this together." A heavy silence fell over the crossroads, and the shadows began to retreat as Jonathan finally looked into my eyes. I saw a flicker of recognition and hope, and the dark presence hesitated. I don't know if I can." "You can," I replied, reaching out my hand to him. "We can do this together. Let me into your pain. Let me help you find the light again." The mist churned even more violently, and the symbol on the ground glowed brightly, as if it were responding to our struggle. Jonathan hesitated, but then, slowly, he began to move toward me. The nebulous presence started to dissipate, and the light from the symbol grew stronger, surrounding us in a blinding glow. "Jonathan, come!" I shouted, my voice echoing with newfound strength. "Let's leave the darkness behind." He reached out his hand, and when our fingers touched, a wave of light surged through the fog. The darkness around us began to fade, and the screams softened into gentle whispers. I could feel the chains breaking, and the air was filled with the sense of liberation. In that moment, I knew we had won. Jonathan and I, together, had confronted the darkness and the truth it guarded. The battle had not just been against a spirit or supernatural force, but against our own fears and regrets. And now, finally free, we could see the path ahead. The light enveloping us was almost blinding, and as the darkness dissolved, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. Jonathan and I were finally free of the oppressive fog. But at the same time, I realized that nothing would ever be the same. The confrontation had left deep marks, scars invisible to others, but ones I would always carry with me. When the light faded, we found ourselves in an open field, far from the crossroads. The sky was clear, and a gentle breeze brushed against my face. Yet, an unsettling silence hung in the air. The peace I had expected didn't come. Instead, a shadow lingered in my heart, a constant reminder of what had happened. Jonathan stood beside me, but he seemed different. There was a fragility in his posture, a sadness that couldn't be ignored. He had been freed, but the battle we fought still echoed in his eyes. I don't know what to do now," he murmured, his voice trembling. "We need time," I replied, trying to find the right words. This moment was powerful, but the internal battle still exists. You can't just forget everything. He nodded, but the distant look on his face worried me. The truth was, it wasn't just him who had been affected. I carried the scars of that experience too. I had seen the abyss of pain and guilt, and now, even in freedom, I felt the echo of every scream, every whisper from the darkness. I had faced not only the spirit that tormented Jonathan, but also my own fear of losing someone I loved. And that internal battle, without a doubt, would leave its mark. Weeks passed, and reality began to settle again. Jonathan and I tried to resume our lives, but the changes were undeniable. He was in therapy, trying to understand the depth of his pain and rebuild an identity that had been consumed by the darkness. I supported him, but at the same time, I struggled with my own guilt for not seeing how much he had been suffering before everything happened. The days were an emotional roller coaster. There were moments of light, when we shared laughter and happy memories, and moments of shadow, when the past seemed to catch up with us again. Sometimes, I saw him grow distant, lost in thought, and I felt as though the darkness still followed him, even if he didn't want to admit it. One night, as I stared out the window, a sense of unease washed over me. The starry sky seemed to watch me, and a cold breeze swept through the air, carrying a familiar whisper. I knew the fight wasn't over. The darkness might have dissipated for now, but the possibility of its return lingered as a constant shadow. A reminder that evil wasn't something that simply vanished, could be lurking, waiting for the right moment to manifest again. Days turned into months, and even though Jonathan was recovering, I couldn't escape the emotional scars the experience had left behind. The nights were especially difficult. Dreams had turned into nightmares, filled with images of the mist and the lost souls haunting my sleep. I would wake in a panic, my breathing rapid and my heart racing, with the overwhelming sensation that the darkness was upon us once again. It was during one of those sleepless nights that I decided to investigate. Something inside me told me the mystery wasn't fully resolved. I needed to understand what had truly happened at the crossroads and what our battle meant for us. With a newfound sense of purpose, I began researching local legends and the mysterious events surrounding the place where we had confronted the darkness. The stories varied. Some spoke of spirits unable to find peace, others of ancient rituals that had been misunderstood. Each account left me more intrigued and, at the same time, more anxious. I knew that delving into the truth might reopen wounds I thought were healing, but I couldn't ignore the feeling that there was more to uncover. One morning, as I prepared to continue my research, I received a call from Jonathan. His voice was tense, and as I listened, I realized something was wrong. I saw something last night, he said, hesitation clear in his tone. It was like the darkness was calling to me again. My heart raced. The thought that the fight wasn't over terrified me. Jonathan, you need to stay strong. We can't let this reach us again. He sighed, and I could hear the internal battle in his breath. I know, but it's hard. It feels like there's a part of me that will never truly be free. I don't know if I can keep going like this. I understood him. The scars we carried ran deep, and even in our freedom, the past continued to haunt us. The fight was far from over, but now we were more than just shadows of pain. We had faced the darkness together, and even though its echoes still lingered, we had the strength of our connection. The mystery of the crossroads remained unsolved, and there was still much to explore. But with Jonathan by my side, I knew we could face whatever came next. The scars we bore were a reminder of what we had overcome. The darkness might try to reach us again, but now we had a light that could not be extinguished. And it was that light, however faint, that would guide us forward. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting soft shadows on the floor of my room. I was awake, but the weight of the previous night still rested heavily on me. As reality set in, I allowed myself to reflect on everything that had happened, the scars still pulsing in my heart and in Jonathan's soul. The fight we had waged together at the crossroads wasn't just a battle against an external force. It was a confrontation with our own fears, insecurities, and the pain we had silently carried. I remembered the intensity of that moment, when the light enveloped us and the mist dissipated. It was as if, even as we were freed, we were also faced with the raw truth of who we were. Freedom came with a price, and that price was the acceptance that the pain wouldn't magically disappear. In the days that followed, I realized that the darkness wasn't an enemy to be destroyed, but an intrinsic part of life. The fear that once consumed me now became an ally, a reminder that I had faced the abyss and survived. Each nightmare that woke me in the middle of the night was an opportunity to confront what couldn't be ignored. The fight wasn't just about winning, but about learning to live with the scars, understanding that they told a story of resilience and strength. Jonathan, on the other hand, was on a different path. The fragility in his posture was visible, and I knew that despite his efforts to recover, the shadow of the darkness still followed him. I wanted to be his anchor, but there were moments when I felt powerless, as if I couldn't reach the depths of his pain. He was battling internal demons that couldn't be seen, and his struggle became mine as well. In every shared laugh, there was an undercurrent of struggle. In every moment of silence, an echo of solitude. As I researched the crossroads, I realized that my search for answers was a reflection of my own need to understand the complexity of what we had experienced. The legends spoke of tormented spirits, of misunderstood rituals, but what truly intrigued me was the nature of the darkness we had faced. What was this force that had overtaken us, and why did it feel so familiar? The quest for answers became a way to reconnect with what I had lost. The sense of control, the reassurance that everything was going to be okay. While reflecting on all of this, a question struck me. To what extent is the darkness a part of us? Are we defined by our experiences, or do we have the power to shape our own destiny? The scars we carry aren't just marks of pain. They are testimonies to our struggle, to the courage we found within ourselves. And by accepting them, we can discover a strength we never knew we had. The morning silence was interrupted by the ringing of the phone. Jonathan's voice came through, and the worry in his tone reminded me that, despite our scars, we were still one. He shared his insecurities, his fears that the darkness might return, and I listened carefully, knowing that together we could face whatever came next. The connection between us was the light that illuminated our path, even when the shadows threatened to consume us. In the end, I realized that the journey wasn't about finding definitive answers, but about understanding that life is a dance between light and shadow. The darkness could whisper, but the light we nurtured in our hearts was stronger. The experience had shaped us, and even though we still carried wounds, those wounds were also part of who we had become. As I watched the sky brighten, a sense of peace began to settle within me. I didn't have all the answers, but there was something comforting in the uncertainty. Jonathan and I were in this journey together, And while the struggle might continue, we knew we were more than our scars. We were survivors, and with every step we took, we were writing a new story. A story where light and darkness coexisted. And despite it all, we chose hope. Time seemed to drag as I spoke with Jonathan on the phone. His words, heavy with despair, echoed in my heart like a somber drumbeat, reminding me that despite all the light we tried to cultivate, the darkness still lingered. It felt as though we were fighting an invisible enemy, a specter feeding on our insecurities. I wanted to reassure him that everything would be okay, but the truth was that the uncertainty felt increasingly tangible. After we hung up, a chill ran down my spine. I tried to distract myself with the routines of the day, but it was clear that Jonathan's internal battle wasn't his alone. It was ours. With every passing moment, the shadow of the darkness seemed to deepen, as if it were creeping into my own essence. It was a constant reminder that the line between light and darkness is thin, and that the struggle wasn't confined to a single event, but was an ongoing journey. That night, as I tried to sleep, the nightmares began to stir in my mind. Twisted images of familiar faces, whispers of voices that seemed to come from a distant place, and the sensation of a crushing weight on my chest that made it impossible to breathe. The terror was no longer an occasional visitor. It had become a part of me, an unwelcome companion that manifested in the shadows of my mind, even in the light of day. And then, the unthinkable happened. Jonathan disappeared. A text message sent at midnight said he needed time, that he had to step away from it all. My heart raced as I read those words, as if an abyss had opened beneath my feet. The light that had once guided our path began to fade, and a sense of despair consumed me. What could have happened? What was he facing alone in the darkness? I decided to return to the crossroads, hoping to find some clue, some sign that Jonathan was still fighting. The full moon lit the path, but as I approached the site, a dense mist began to envelop everything around me. The silence was oppressive, and the sensation of being watched grew with every step. When I reached the crossroads, memories of the battle we had fought together came flooding back, and a wave of sadness washed over me. That's when I saw a figure in the shadows. My heart pounding, I called Jonathan's name, but the only reply was the echo of my own voice. The figure moved closer, slowly revealing a familiar face, but with a vacant expression. It was him, but something was terribly wrong. His eyes, once full of life, now reflected a profound darkness, as if he had made a pact with something he shouldn't have. "You shouldn't have come here," he whispered, his voice like a mournful lament. The darkness, it didn't let me go. A chill ran through me. Jonathan was there, but he was no longer the same. The terror we had once shared now consumed him from the inside out. I wanted to believe there was still hope, that we could find a way together, but the truth hit me like a blow. He was lost, and I didn't know if there was anything I could do to bring him back. "I can't leave you here," I said, trying to reach for his hand. But he pulled away, as though my presence was a burden he couldn't bear. The pain in his eyes was unbearable. He was being pulled into a darkness I couldn't comprehend. "Release me," he begged. And in that moment, I realized the battle we fought wasn't just against external forces. It was a fight against ourselves, against the parts of us we couldn't accept. And while I desperately wanted to save him, the fear that he might be the cause of my own fall began to take root in my heart. The mist thickened, and suddenly, everything went dark. The silence was shattered by a scream. I couldn't tell if it was mine or Jonathan's, and it no longer mattered. When the light returned, I found myself alone at the crossroads. The only thing left was a sense of loss and despair. The darkness had triumphed, and in our struggle, the victory had come at a cost we couldn't bear. Now, as I look into the void Jonathan left behind, I realize that darkness isn't an enemy to be defeated, but a part of us that must be accepted, even if the price of that acceptance is losing the ones we love most. The journey wasn't about finding answers, but about understanding that, in the end, light and darkness coexist, and the battles we fight may not always have a happy ending. If you faced your own shadows, I invite you to share your story in the comments. What did you learn from confronting your fears? How did you find your light in the midst of darkness? Let's explore this dance between light and shadow together, because every story is a step toward understanding. Like and subscribe so we can continue this journey, because no matter how dark the tales may be, they always have something to teach us.